Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.
Welcome into Room 442. Sara Poraria joined alongside Mikey Singh. And Mikey, it was not a good weekend for TFC, to say the least. Toronto FC got blown out by Philadelphia Union 4-2, their biggest deficit so far this season. Their unbeaten run is done.
Yeah.
In a way, I'm thinking maybe this could be a good thing. At least it was a switch up. It wasn't another draw. It was a really bad loss, but maybe, this could kind of set the tone for them. A bit of a wake-up call, if you will.
Yeah, perhaps that's what you hope. A team like that goes through probably their worst performance of the season. That's what you hope for. Yeah, there's no sugarcoating it, right? It was really bad to watch. TFC were not ready for this game whatsoever. They struggled to build out of the back. That's obviously the way that Philadelphia likes to capitalize on. That's always been their DNA. So TFC knew that heading into this matchup. Jonathan Osorio said that, he believes the players were aware of what Philadelphia was going to, the challenge that Philadelphia was going to present, but clearly for whatever reason, the team wasn't ready for it. So then you have to ask other questions like, is TFC maybe just not good enough? Is it just a one-off? Maybe it's just that Philadelphia, who, by the way, I think we need to acknowledge Philadelphia were finally healthy, and this was the closest to their actual starting 11 since the first game of the season, and they needed to put in a big performance because of a really important Champions League tie on Wednesday. And they also have a bye on Saturday, so they actually don't play this weekend, which is why they were able to field their closest starting 11. And like we touched on in our preview, TFC going away to Subaru Park in Philadelphia, it's always been a really, really tough place for them to play, at least in recent years. So, it seems like it was a combination of everything. The first being TFC absolutely not being ready.
Yeah.
And I think they really did miss Matt Hedges and Michael Bradley there in the heart of their defense because they're such a calming, steady presence. And that looked like they desperately needed that at that game. And then also Philadelphia, perhaps rounding into form at just an unideal time for TFC.
We'll get into TFC's defense because I will want to get into that. But let's quickly talk about a big talking point for TFC. Lorenzo Insigne, obviously starting this game and scored. Does that give the fans some hope, knowing that he's been out since the first game of the season with an injury, but he gets slotted right back in and is able to score, looking as if nothing has happened, these past 7 or 8 weeks now?
Yeah, so I guess let me start by saying when the way that they started the game and they played Lorenzo Insigne through the middle of the park, that obviously did not work. It's when he got back on the left wing, he started to look more like himself. And yeah, there were some really good moments by Lorenzo Insigne down the stretch. I think he managed to link up well with his teammates. The goal was absolutely gorgeous. But here's what I take issue with. You're down 4-0
The celebration
in the game.
I knew.
You're down 4-0 in the game. You score, a really good goal. And I get it's your first goal of the season. And I get it's been a hard time for you personally early on because you wanted to make such an impact. But read the room. You're down 4-0 in the team's worst performance of the season. And you get a consolation marker. And you're celebrating the goal. Like that. And then an hour later, you're posting your goal on Instagram like it's something that's worth celebrating. That's a mentality thing for me where it almost seems like he feels like he's bigger than the club. Do you think if Jonathan Osorio scored that goal or Michael Bradley scored that goal that they would be celebrating in sort of the fashion that Lorenzo Insigne did? That to me speaks to a mentality that I don't think is ideal at that point in the game.
Yeah. This is something that has stuck with me since I spoke to Stephen Caldwell here a few weeks ago, and he was speaking about this, in that Lorenzo Insigne has a lot to prove, not only on the pitch, but off the pitch, because he hasn't really kind of connected with the city in Toronto. We don't really see him. He has, like you mentioned, gone to certain Raptors games, Leafs games, and stuff like that, but when we always compare it to, of course, Javinko, it's a completely different story. And I think when I saw this, I thought the exact same thing. And then everything that Steven had told me, it kind of all was brought back up. And I really think that he's here for himself. I don't think he cares if the team wins or loses, because he's going to be fine either way, right? He's getting paid. He's had his great career at Napoli and Italy. That's what people are going to remember him for. Let's be frank, like that was the best part of his career. So it's natural. But I honestly think like I don't know. It's not like, it doesn't seem like him and the team are meshing. And I'm not talking about the team as in just the players, but I think the team as a whole. Does that make sense?
No, I do think it. Like, we from the outside looking in, we can't say definitively that is the case, but that's definitely the vibe that you're getting when you see moments like that where he's celebrating his goal and then posting it onto Instagram. Like, that it epitomizes that he feels like no matter what, he's going to be good. Is he really bought in and really committed to helping Toronto FC, get back to where they used to be? Does he understand what that means? Or is he just okay showing up, playing games, and collecting his paycheck at the end of the day? That's the one thing that's going to be always in question until he shows that from a mentality standpoint that he can come out and he by the way, he hasn't done media this year at all, which I think is really weird. He hasn't spoken to media at all. But he can come out, he can say all the right things, but it's more than that, right? You got to show it. You have to really show that you're committed, almost even more so because you have the background, you have the story of being a guy that's going to be paid so much. It's a guy who already has an accomplished career at Napoli. You almost have to go out of your way to show how committed you are to a team like Toronto, who, let's face it, like, in a way, you can argue that from the outside looking in, that Lorenzo Insigne is bigger than Toronto FC. That's just the way, other Italians might perceive it, other European football fans might perceive it. But the reality is you can't operate a football club like that. So that's where my concern is. Yeah.
No, I think it's fair to have concern. It'll be interesting to see how the next couple games go with him playing more. Let's look at the defense, though, of TFC. Against Philly, it was awful, to say the least, Mikey. There was such a lack of communication. You could tell even with the initial own goal at the beginning, which was unlucky. No shade there.
Really unlucky.
But what I took away from that was they're all looking around. They're kicking it into each other. Like, there was no understanding of where anyone was spacing-wise. Like, it was just... And at that moment, you could kind of say, okay, this could go really bad because you take one unlucky goal. But I think it was more of just the way they were playing until that point. And then we saw it again and again and again. And Philly just dominated the defense. Like, they were running circles around these guys. And I know, as you mentioned, Matt Hedges obviously still injured. Michael Bradley not dropping back from the midfield. Those are massive players for TFC, but this was not good, especially since what we've been talking about all season, TFC's best
defense.
Yeah, it's their defense. That's their best aspect.
No, chaos. That's what Philadelphia want to create. That's the type of games they love to strive in, and that's exactly what happened with TFC. And it's the first time this season that we're seeing their defense sort of waver. So in a way, not great, not really acceptable, but I will give them a pass on it because it was the first time that we've actually seen them slip up. Lucas McNaughton had a really tough game, 45 minutes. He was subbed off at halftime because of a leg injury, according to Bob Bradley, but up until that point, he stepped in and he's filled a void at times and looked pretty good doing it, but this was just a slower performance from him, and I'm sure he would be the first to acknowledge that. But it wasn't just Lucas, it was the entire back line, the entire midfield, bad giveaways. Sigurd Rosted had a tough game as well. That's all we can really say. It was a really tough game, and hopefully that what they showed in the first 9 games of the season is a better sample size than actually this one, I'll say 45 minutes, but the last 45, Philadelphia just kind of took their foot off the gas pedal too.
Yeah, well, they could.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I have to ask you, let's wrap it up here, though. Is it time for Bob Bradley to start panicking? Let me remind you guys, TFC are 12th out of 15th. Early days still, but first 9 teams in the table go on to the playoffs. So I think there is a lot of leeway for teams like TFC, who are kind of not really getting into the flow of things, but they're now 12th. They're It's not. I don't think it's good. It's not good.
I mean, it's not good. It's objectively not good. 12th place is not where you want to be. Is it time to start panicking? No, because like we mentioned it, like it's their first real bad performance this season. The other games, the argument was they should have found ways to go on and get the 3 points. But heck, you got to be in that position for us to say you should have went on and got the 3 points. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't bad performances leading up to this game, which was a complete bad performance. So I don't think he should start to panic. He did say after that game that we do need to take a hard look at themselves, which I think is absolutely true. We talked about this all year. Like, they're really top-heavy team, right? Mm-hmm. They invested in some really big free agents. They paid them a lot of money. And when they don't have some of those key pieces, are they still as good as we believe they could be? At this point, you have to have some doubts. That being said, what are we, 9 games into the season? This is only their second loss. I really don't know what this team is.
I think that's the biggest thing.
I really
People don't know the identity of this team. And I will say, I mean, I've been much more critical of TFC this season than you have, but I think that yes, their second loss. So we've talked about how many draws they have. And I think it just comes down to those games when you talk about not being able to win, let's say.
Yeah.
I think it's because they have no clue who they are, what they're doing. Like, a lot of the time, I think it just seems like a group of, 11 guys that have just got together on the pitch. Like, I find that sometimes there's such a lack of connection between players.
Offensively.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen Bernadeschi and Richie, I'd say, between those two, like anyone else. But, it just... there is something going on with this team, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, and it sucks because Lorenzo Insigne was supposed to come in and, TFC were supposed to still be good defensively, and then he was hopefully going to add that spark. But when you add him into the lineup and you try and play some sort of formation without a striker, because they didn't start a striker in this game, it didn't work. Mm-hmm. And now you wonder what exactly is this team's identity moving forward with Lorenzo Insigne. How do they get the best out of their number 9 position? Today is the transfer deadline for the primary transfer window. So we'll see if TFC can find a way. As I wrote about, there's not much they can really do unless they make certain other moves. So let's see if there is a way that TFC finds a way to free up some cap space, because I think it's clear to say that this team needs a solution at number 9. I'm not sure if they quite have it at their roster.
Yeah, well, they have a big week coming up ahead as they are welcoming Sean Johnson's former club, NYCFC, will be at BMO Field this weekend on Saturday. Mikey and I will be back later this week to preview that match.